Welcome to the streets of New York City, summer of 1853. The clatter of horse-drawn carriages, the chatter of children, the scent of bread baking in narrow alleys. All seems ordinary, yet shadows move where eyes cannot follow. Before we continue, pause. Imagine your own streets, your familiar faces, and the invisible dangers that might lurk just out of sight. Leave a comment. Where are you listening from? At what exact time? Feel the fear, the tension, the disbelief, as we step into a story history almost tried to erase. Among the crowd walks a man, Solomon Northup, a free man, a musician, a father, unaware that the world he knows is about to vanish. One moment tending to his violin, the next strangers seize him, blindfold him, and he is plunged into a nightmare he could never have imagined. The city, once a promise of freedom, disappears behind him. Ferry rides, wagons, rivers, all leading south, to Louisiana, to cotton fields, to chains, to a life stolen for 12 long years. Men vanish here, families shattered, lives consumed by a system built to erase them. How could a free man walking among neighbors be taken and survive to tell the tale? This is not fiction. This is 1841. This is Solomon Northup. 12 years lost in bondage, a man's fight to return. The year is 1853. The air thick with heat and dust. New York City hums with life, but the shadows of what is to come stretch far beyond the cobblestone streets. Solomon Northup, a free man of remarkable talent, walks among the familiar alleys and taverns, carrying the faint scent of polished wood from his violin case. The chatter of merchants, the laughter of children, the clanging of iron wheels on stone all blend into a symphony of normalcy. Yet beneath it, an unseen tension lingers. Freedom is fragile, trust is a luxury, and the world beyond the city teems with peril for men like him. The Hudson River glints under the afternoon sun, its currents calm and deceptive. Ferries slide silently past, carrying passengers unaware of the fates that could befall them. Every corner of the city holds promise, every familiar face offers comfort, yet the invisible chains of human cruelty are already beginning to coil. And then, as the city pulses with life, the stage shifts, miles to the south, to the lush, oppressive landscapes of Louisiana. The air hangs heavy with the scent of sugar-cane molasses and damp earth. The plantations rise like fortresses among the fields, vast and unyielding, their wooden cabins scattered like islands amid the green expanse. Here the world is ruled by a system that measures men not by their hearts or minds, but by the weight of their labor. The sun beats down relentlessly. Shadows fall long and jagged across the rows of cotton. Overseers mounted on horses patrol with a watchful eye. The crack of the whip punctuates the rhythm of toil, and whispers travel from cabin to cabin. Rumors of men taken, of souls lost, of names erased from existence. In this southern expanse, the environment itself seems complicit. The dirt roads, dust-laden and treacherous. The forest edges dark, hiding the unknown. Creaking trees sway under the weight of history. Cicadas drone a monotonous chorus that masks the hidden cries of the oppressed. Night brings no respite. The fields bathed in moonlight reveal the glint of chains, the silhouettes of men bending beneath unyielding labor. The cabins small and simple smell of sweat, smoke, and fear. Fires burn dimly in the hearths, casting flickering shadows on walls scarred by years of hardship. Every sound, the distant barking of a dog, the call of an owl, the snapping of twigs, holds the possibility of danger. The promise of another life altered forever. Back north, the riverbanks of New York and the harbor bustle with activity, a stark contrast to the quiet horror of the South. Merchants count coins. Sailors unload cargo. Yet even here, the undercurrent of human trafficking flows silently. The men and women of color who navigate these streets understand the fragile balance between freedom and capture. And in that balance, Solomon's fate teeters. We set our stage, not merely in geography, but in the tension between two worlds. The freedom of the North, however limited by society's prejudice, and the absolute dominion of the southern plantations. From the bustling streets and crowded docks, the narrative will carry us southward, into a landscape of sweat, toil, and the invisible prison of bondage. The environment itself shapes the story. The tall grasses hiding paths to escape. The rivers offering both a route to freedom and a perilous obstacle. The cabins standing as symbols of confinement, the fields stretching endlessly as a testament to human endurance and suffering. And yet, amidst this landscape, there are glimmers. Small acts of defiance, whispered prayers in the cabins, music carried softly through the night air. Spirituals that speak of hope-coded messages of escape and tales of resilience passed from one generation to the next. These cultural markers create a secondary layer, a folklore that intertwines with the historical fact. They remind us that even in the harshest conditions, the human spirit seeks light, seeks agency, seeks a way home. As we move our narrative forward, the stage extends beyond simple physical locations. It encompasses the social constructs, the hierarchy enforced by fear and violence, the silent complicity of those who profit from oppression. It encompasses the subtle ways in which power exerts itself, the way a glance from an overseer can dictate the course of a man's day, the way rumor and suspicion ripple through a plantation, the way freedom can feel a lifetime away, yet is never entirely forgotten. This duality, North and South freedom and bondage, visibility and erasure, forms the core of the world on Northup will navigate. The stage is set for a journey that moves not only through space, but through the emotional and psychological landscapes of men and women who survive under extreme duress. We will see the meticulous routines of plantation life, the daily grind measured by sunrise and sunset, the subtle hierarchies among the enslaved, the whispered names of those who came before whose fates remain unknown. These details, mundane yet horrifying, form the backdrop against which Solomon's story unfolds. Every element of this environment contributes to the tension. The relentless sun, the oppressive humidity, the smell of sweat and earth, the distance of the horizon across the cotton fields all work to immerse the listener, to make them feel the weight of history pressing down. Each cabin, each tree line, each patch of cleared field carries memory and danger, and yet also resilience. A testament to those who endured, resisted, and in some cases returned to tell the tale. And so our stage is both literal and symbolic. New York streets bustling with life and shadowed with danger. Louisiana plantations sprawling and suffocating. Cabins, fields, rivers, and forests all stitched together by the human experience of Solomon Northup. By understanding the terrain, both physical and societal, the listener begins to comprehend the peril, the courage, and the fortitude required for one man to survive 12 years lost in bondage. The environment shapes the narrative. It breathes with the story. It hums with the tension. It whispers of history that refuses to be forgotten. In this chapter of context, we are immersed not only in place, but in atmosphere. The scents, the sounds, the textures. The flicker of candlelight in a cabin. The soft rustle of leaves, the distant call of animals. All contribute to a visceral sense of time and place. These sensory markers ground the listener. They make real the distances traveled, the hardships endured, the invisible chains that bind. And in understanding this, we prepare for the next layer, the collision of historical fact and folklore, where the concrete evidence of Solomon's ordeal meets the haunting stories that have lingered in memory. Here the stage is fully set. The audience knows the world he will navigate. The stakes are clear, and the tension is ready to be amplified as we step into fact layer 1. The clatter of hooves echoes faintly across the cotton fields, mingling with the distant shouts of overseers. The sun burns relentlessly over the Louisiana landscape. Sweat beads on brows, soaking into coarse, worn shirts. Each movement, each gesture measured not in comfort or freedom, but by survival. Here stands Solomon Northup, a man of New York, freeborn, a musician with gentle hands and a father's heart, thrust into a world where identity is stripped and every breath is contested. In the records of the time, his existence is traced through stark impersonal facts, runaway slave advertisements typed in harsh black ink proclaiming the capture or disappearance of a man, fate unknown offering a paltry reward for his return, his individuality reduced to height, hair color, age, and last known location. These cold documents tell of a systematic cruelty that stretches across states and decades. Yet they cannot convey the trembling fear, the silent prayers, the whispered hopes that accompany each man as he bends beneath the scorching sun. Ledger entries, bills of sale, and overseer journals recount the transfer of men like Solomon from one plantation to another. Each page speaks in the monotonous language of commerce dates, amounts brief notes of obedience or rebellion. And yet between these lines lies the unrecorded truth. A man's mind racing with memories of family music, freedom, and the unbearable ache of separation. The facts alone, stark and unadorned, convey a skeletal outline. But the flesh of the experience is found in the spaces between the trembling hands, hiding a note of hope. The stolen glance at a familiar face, the small secret defiance in bending the knee, less fully than commanded. The ledger cannot capture the tremor of courage in a man who refuses silently to be entirely broken. And in these spaces, folklore breathes life into history. Tales whispered under moonlight speak of spirits who return to guide the living of ancestors, walking unseen among the fields of children, dreaming of rivers carrying them northward. WPA narratives collected decades later recount the eerie persistence of these stories. A shadow crossing a field at night, a violin heard faintly through the humid air, a whisper of a name carried on the wind. In these stories, fact and imagination coexist. A man might vanish from records, yet his presence remains in the collective memory. The folklore preserves a kind of truth that the written page cannot. It encodes fear, hope, defiance, and longing. It is a map of the soul navigating a hostile world. On the plantations, the physical environment itself is complicit. The cabins are small, overcrowded, and suffused with the smells of sweat smoke and cooking fires. Dirt floors absorb years of toil and suffering. Wood creaks under the weight of generations. Outside, the fields stretch endlessly, punctuated by the occasional tree or distant waterway. The overseer's gaze is constant, a force more oppressive than the sun. The enslaved move with precision, silent conversations, passing in glances, gestures, and songs. Spirituals are sung softly coded messages hidden within melodies, offering solace, guidance, or instruction. And at night, these same songs drift across the fields, blending with the wind, creating a chorus that is both defiance and prayer, warning and memory. The facts of Solomon's captivity are corroborated in multiple sources. Accounts of men like him appear across newspapers, personal diaries, and government documents. The stark phrases captured, sold south, fate unknown, populate the records. Yet alongside these cold facts, folklore emerges visions, omens, and supernatural warnings. Plantation legends tell of a man appearing to others in dreams, guiding them towards safety or cautioning them of impending punishment. Some describe the sound of footsteps in the night echoing across empty fields, as though the vanished are still walking among the living. These stories, terrifying and inspiring, form a cultural memory that resists erasure. They testify to the persistence of consciousness, the refusal of spirits and stories to be forgotten. In the records, Solomon's name appears inconsistently. Variations, Misspellings and deliberate obfuscations obscure his presence. Overseer journals note a new hand or a northern man, sometimes praising compliance, sometimes noting perceived insolence. A ledger might list his age, height, or skill, yet it cannot capture the rhythm of his heartbeat, the subtle defiance in his posture, the anguish in his eyes when he hears distant music reminiscent of New York. These details are invisible in official documents, yet they exist vividly in oral traditions, in whispered memories preserved by those who shared the cabins, the fields, the small acts of solidarity that made survival possible. The supernatural layer deepens as stories of the Phantom Regiment intertwine with Solomon's narrative. Military records and anecdotal accounts tell of units of black soldiers who reported strange phenomena during campaigns. Alarms sounding with no cause, shadows moving against the moonlight. Some claim to see figures marching silently in misty fields. Within the enslaved communities, such tales merge seamlessly with plantation legends. The same fields that claimed men like Solomon are whispered to be haunted by them, their presence felt in the shifting wind, the rustle of leaves, the creak of cabin floors. These stories are not mere fantasy. They encode fear resistance, moral warning, and the continuing presence of those deemed property, but never fully conquered in spirit. And yet, amidst this interplay of fact and folklore, the humanity of Solomon and others like him persists. Small gestures of defiance, whispered words of encouragement, the subtle rhythms of daily work performed with pride and dignity. These moments, imperceptible to overseers, yet critical for survival, illustrate the complexity of life under bondage. A glance exchanged a note passed secretly. A song hummed beneath the breath, each act a tiny assertion of selfhood, each act a preservation of hope. Fact records labor movement transactions. Folklore preserves emotion, courage, and the intangible persistence of identity. The physical environment amplifies these dynamics. Dusty paths, dense forests, slow-moving rivers. The terrain itself becomes part of the story shaping decisions, opportunities, and dangers. A river might offer a route north, yet hide the risk of capture or death. A forest provides cover, but conceals unseen threats. The interplay of geography, climate, and human action forms a stage for endurance, cunning, and sometimes miraculous survival. The folklore layer transforms these elements into living symbols. Rivers become guides, forests become haunted corridors, night winds carry messages from the vanished. Within the cabins, life persists under extraordinary conditions. The smell of cooking fires, the creaking wood, the murmured prayers. In whispered tones, tales circulate of men who walked out of captivity and visions of children dreaming of songs their parents once sang, in freedom of mysterious notes left in cabins guiding would-be escapees. These narratives carry a dual weight: they comfort and they warn. They sustain hope while acknowledging the omnipresent peril. They are memory encoded in myth. The ledger cannot account for these subtleties, yet without them the story of Solomon Northup would be incomplete. And so the fact layer and the folklore layer entwine. The official records provide names, dates, and transactions. The stories, the dreams, the songs, the whispered warnings, these convey fear, courage, despair, and hope. They preserve the humanity of men and women who endured the unimaginable. The ledger gives us a skeleton, the folklore gives it soul. Together they form a living tapestry of Solomon Northup's first years in bondage, setting the stage for the human encounters, the small rebellions, and the eventual fight to reclaim a life stolen. Every sound, every scent, every shifting shadow contributes to the immersive experience. The hum of cicadas, the distant barking of dogs, the creak of a door, the soft rustle of leaves. They punctuate the narrative, guiding the listener's attention, reminding them that history is not static, that every detail matters, that every moment carries weight. In this expanded weave of fact and folklore, the audience begins to grasp not only the cruelty endured, but the remarkable resilience, cunning, and humanity that persisted even in the most dehumanizing conditions. And thus the first layer is complete. Fact and folklore, ledger and legend coexisting. Each amplifies the other, revealing both the horror and the persistence of spirit. Here Solomon Northup's story begins to take shape. A story measured not only in years lost, but in the indelible traces left upon the land, the people, and the memories of those who survived to tell it. The sun rises slowly over the vast Louisiana fields, casting long golden streaks across the rows of cotton. Solomon Northup awakens in the dim light of a small cabin. The floor rough, the walls scarred by decades of use. The air is thick with the scent of sweat smoke and damp earth. Outside, the rhythm of life begins with relentless precision. Overseers mount their horses, scanning the horizon, ready to enforce obedience. Their shadows fall across the fields like dark omens, stretching across the bending bodies of men and women forced into labor. Each day is measured in toil, in repetition, in the unyielding cycle of sunrise to sunset. Yet within this relentless routine, Solomon finds moments of clarity, of small acts that remind him of who he is. He rises, stretching stiff limbs, aching from the night's minimal rest. The cabin holds a few others, men with eyes muddy from fatigue, women whispering songs beneath their breath, children clinging to the edges of a world they cannot fully understand. They move in a silent choreography, gathering water, stoking fires, preparing for the day ahead. Every gesture is precise, rehearsed over months and years. Survival depends on attention to detail, on the subtle communication passed through glances, gestures, and the cadence of labor. Solomon steps outside the coarse dirt crunching beneath his bare feet. Feeling the morning sun burn into his shoulders, the weight of invisibility pressing upon him. The fields stretch endlessly, a sea of green punctuated by white cotton bolls. The breeze carrying the faint whisper of spirits. Whispers that those attuned to memory, to folklore, sometimes hear. He joins the line of laborers bending, picking, stacking. The overseer's whip cracks a sharp punctuation in the morning air. Yet in the midst of this brutality, the human heart persists. Solomon hums softly a melody he recalls from New York. The notes drift across the rows, soft, nearly imperceptible, a memory of freedom, a reminder of a life that once was a life that might yet return. Some hear the tune, recognizing it, and a subtle understanding passes among them. A silent message: endurance, hope, resilience. In the midday heat, exhaustion presses down like an invisible weight. Hands blister, backs ache, voices are swallowed by the wind. Yet Solomon navigates the world with awareness. Every glance, every breath, every movement calculated to avoid punishment, yet retain dignity. He notices the rhythm of the overseer's patrols, the slight hesitation in a horse's step, the tension in a voice. These are his guides. Small signals that allow him to anticipate, to survive, to retain fragments of autonomy within a system designed to erase it. Each day becomes a delicate negotiation between compliance and survival, between silence and expression, between invisibility and selfhood. Inside the cabin during rest periods, whispers of resistance circulate. Small stories, half remembered, half dreamed. Tales of men who disappeared and returned in visions, of spirits who walk the fields at night. Some believe these spirits protect them, guiding secret paths to safety. Others speak of dreams, warnings, omens. Solomon listens, integrating these stories into his understanding of the world. They provide both caution and comfort, a spiritual framework to navigate the horrors of daily life. The folklore layer, intangible yet palpable, sustains morale, transmits coded knowledge, preserves hope. Evenings bring fleeting respite. The sun descends, casting elongated shadows across the fields. Labor ends, though the work of endurance continues, repairing clothing, tending the minimal food, gathering water. Conversations are hushed. Eyes meet across the cabin, searching for shared understanding. Here small gestures carry enormous weight. a hand extended in solidarity, a glance acknowledging suffering, a shared secret about an overseer's schedule. These minor acts form a network of human connection, a lifeline invisible to those who wish to suppress it. Solomon's music becomes more than pastime. It is a vehicle of memory and subtle defiance. At night, in private moments, he plays the violin softly. The notes carry across the cabin walls through cracks and gaps. The other men and women listen in silence, absorbing the vibrations. Some close their eyes, remembering distant homes, family members, a city that felt like freedom. The music is a reminder that the self is not entirely lost, that even in bondage, the essence of identity endures. Workdays blend into weeks, weeks into months. And the passage of time is marked not by calendars, but by the weariness etched into faces, the rhythm of seasons, the shift of light across the fields. Rain comes soaking the earth, creating mud and complicating labor. Heat rises, suffocating and relentless. Each element of the natural environment becomes a character in Solomon's journey. The oppressive sun, the cooling breeze, the unpredictable storms. They dictate pace, challenge, endurance, shape experience. Survival is entwined with observation, with learning the language of nature as much as the language of the overseers. Within this human landscape, moments of subtle resistance appear. Workers exchange whispered messages about safe paths, hidden water sources, small deviations from imposed routines. Children learn to read these unspoken cues. Stories of escape and survival circulate quietly, transmitted orally. Folklore merges with fact, creating a layered reality in which Solomon navigates. He must balance caution with expression, invisibility with assertion. Every act carries risk, yet every gesture also carries significance. Nightfall brings new dynamics. The cabins darken, the stars appear, and the wind carries sounds amplified by silence. Footsteps outside whispers among the trees, the faint rustle of leaves. Each noise is interpreted, assessed, internalized. Solomon lies awake, reflecting, rehearsing responses, remembering New York, imagining escape, remembering family. His mind becomes a landscape as complex as the physical one. Strategies are conceived, contingencies imagined, hope nurtured. And always the presence of folklore, stories of spirits, prophetic dreams, warnings in song remains interwoven with lived reality guiding and sustaining him. The cabin, the fields, the wind, the song, the whispered stories all converge to create a lived experience. The human scene, raw and immediate, is not merely survival of body, but survival of spirit. Fact layer gives us the structure of labor, hierarchy, punishment. Folklore layer gives us insight into perception, moral courage, and the internal resilience of the human soul. Together they illuminate Solomon's day-to-day existence. Each dawn and dusk, each moment of pain and reflection, each act of quiet resistance. They form the bridge between historical documentation and the intimate reality of life under bondage. And so within the human scene we witness not only endurance, but humanity preserved. Every glance, every whispered word, every note played on a violin becomes a thread in the tapestry of survival. Solomon Northup's life is not defined solely by the chains that bind him, but by the courage he maintains, the wisdom he acquires, the relationships he fosters. The listener, immersed in this cinematic rhythm, begins to feel the weight of history pressing down the tension between oppression and resilience, the subtle signs of defiance. Here the human experience is fully realized. The story is alive, immediate, and intimate. And the stage is set for the next layer, fact layer 2 plus folklore layer 2, where broader historical currents, societal structures, and spiritual echoes further illuminate Solomon's 12 years lost in bondage. The sun rises over Louisiana, once more spreading light across the endless rows of cotton. But it illuminates more than plants and soil. It casts shadows over the very lives of men and women whose existence is catalogued only in fragments, in ledgers, in newspapers, in fleeting eyewitness accounts. Solomon Northup's story emerges in this context. Yet it is only one among countless names recorded, misrecorded, or entirely lost to history. Fact. Layer 2 is the skeleton of this narrative: bills of sale, overseers' logs, shipping manifests, legal documents. Each line a testament to the transactional nature of human life under bondage. Names, ages, descriptions, skills, these are the units of measurement for the enslaved. Yet no ledger, no receipt, no note can convey the weight of being forced from family, from freedom, from identity. Each entry represents not only a person's labor, but the potential for resilience, defiance, and memory to persist. Newspapers across New Orleans, Charleston, and even New York occasionally provide glimpses, advertisements offering rewards for return of men taken, columns reporting fate unknown, notices of kidnappings that blur the lines between free and enslaved. These fragments, when stitched together, form a partial map of movement, a geographic and temporal trail of human suffering. Some articles describe rivers as boundaries, others as routes of escape. Towns, docks, plantations are all points along a network of enforced mobility, yet also sites of possibility for resistance. The ledger and the press together create a lattice through which Solomon's physical journey can be traced. Yet the ledger cannot convey fear, and the newspaper cannot capture the terror of being sold into hands unknown. Maps of migration and transport provide further context. The flow of human lives along rivers, over roads, across state lines. The Exoduster movement, decades later, echoes the desire for freedom. Yet the earlier immediate experience of Solomon is entangled in a living geography. Rivers are both lifelines and barriers. Forests are both refuge and trap. Every bend of the Mississippi, every bayou, every delta shapes possibility, constrains movement, and amplifies risk. In each mile of travel there exists potential for liberation or for further entrapment. Fact layer anchors Solomon's journey in reality, giving the listener coordinates, but geography alone cannot convey the psychic weight of bondage. Folklore layer 2 fills in the emotional, spiritual, and cultural dimensions. Within the enslaved communities, stories circulate of spirits who linger along riverbanks, guiding or warning those who pay attention. Some claim to see men who vanished long ago, walking silently through fields at night, returning in dreams to whisper advice or caution. Plantation legends describe apparitions in cabins, omens. In the rustle of leaves, the distant echo of a violin played in memory of home. These tales function simultaneously as moral instruction, cultural memory, and psychological sustenance. They transmit knowledge encoded in story form: when to move, when to hide, when to hope. They are the living record of what facts cannot express. In this layer, fact and folklore interact intimately. Military records of black regiments stationed in the South report alarms without visible cause, shadows moving through fog, sounds of marching in the dead of night. These reports, when interpreted through oral tradition, merge with plantation ghost stories. The same motifs recur: the persistence of the spirit, the invisible guidance offered to those navigating peril, the haunting as both warning and witness. Solomon's 12 years are framed not only by work and captivity, but by a spiritual landscape and an unseen network of protection, memory, and resistance that threads through his daily existence. Within the cabins and fields, human ingenuity and resilience manifest subtly. A glance exchanged a whispered warning, a note passed under cover. Songs and spirituals serve dual purposes. They provide comfort, yet encode information maps of safe paths and alerts to the movement of overseers. Solomon's musical skill becomes a medium of subtle resistance. Each note carries memory and identity, linking him to the world he left behind and the potential for return. The human scene and the cultural folklore are inseparable. The facts describe the labor, The stories preserve the spirit. The broader societal and economic structures reinforce the context. Hierarchies among enslaved populations, dynamics with overseers, and the enforced patterns of daily labor dictate the possibilities of survival. Official documents record compliance or punishment, but folklore interprets and transforms these interactions, offering guidance, solace, or warnings. The environment itself. The oppressive heat, sudden storms, shifting river currents, dense cane fields, interacts with these structures to shape experience. Folklore encodes the terrain. Rivers are guides. Forests conceal or reveal stars, point toward direction or danger. Solomon's perception of the land is informed as much by inherited stories and dreams as by empirical observation. Dreams, visions, and omens persist through the nights. Some witness family members who speak of endurance of paths to freedom. Others encounter spirits of the recently deceased, warning of danger or offering subtle counsel. These spiritual narratives influence daily choices. They provide a moral and psychological framework, a lens through which to interpret both cruelty and opportunity. The folklore layer ensures that even when fact erases identity, spirit persists. It encodes strategies of survival records. Courage preserves hope. The intersection of fact layer 2 and folklore layer 2 is most evident in the fields themselves. Patterns of labor geography and hierarchy intersect with dreams, songs, and apparitions. Observing the river's bend may inform escape. Noting a shadow in the cane may prevent punishment. Interpreting a whispered story may preserve life. The interweaving of factual documentation and folkloric knowledge allows for a multi-dimensional understanding. The audience begins to grasp not only Solomon's physical movements, but his psychic and cultural environment. Every ledger entry, every map, every newspaper clipping coexists with dreams, ghost stories, and coded songs. Together they form a complex, immersive, and living landscape. Daily routines reveal the human element within this oppressive system. Preparation of meals, tending of cabins, distribution of water, whispered instructions to children. Each action is laden with meaning and potential consequences. Fact layer 2 provides names, roles, and recorded actions. Folklore layer 2 supplies context, interpretation, and memory. Both are required to convey the totality of Solomon's experience. Work is grueling, constant, and observable. Dreams, omens, and whispered stories are subtle yet equally vital. Without the folklore, one might understand the physical oppression, but not the psychological endurance. Without the fact, one might imagine heroism, but fail to perceive the systemic oppression that makes survival miraculous. Nightfall brings subtle rituals. Firelight flickers across cabin walls, casting dancing shadows. Songs and whispered stories circulate. Men, women, and children listen for signs in the wind. Shadows of the past, specters of those lost, and memories of freedom blend into a tapestry of consciousness that guides behavior. These nocturnal patterns form a cultural infrastructure as vital as any physical preparation. Solomon internalizes this guidance, blending it with careful observation of the overseers, the fields, the riverbanks. The synthesis of fact and folklore becomes the framework for his survival and eventual resistance. And so, fact layer 2 plus folklore layer 2 paints a vivid multi-dimensional picture. The ledger, the map, the newspaper, the military record, each step of the river, each cabin, each overseer, and interwoven with them the ghostly steps, prophetic dreams, spiritual songs, and whispered tales. Together they illuminate the enormity of Solomon Northup's captivity. They convey both external realities and internal landscapes. Oppression and endurance, cruelty and cunning despair, and hope. This expanded layer establishes the foundation for the deep bridge and climax, where all these elements, documented fact, human experience, and folklore, will converge in the most harrowing, illuminating, and cinematic moments of Solomon's 12 years lost in bondage. The Louisiana sky darkens slowly, heavy with the weight of heat and humidity. The cotton fields stretch endlessly, rows upon rows bending under the sun, each stalk a silent witness to the labor and suffering of men whose names may never appear in print. Solomon Northup moves carefully among them, his body aching, his mind alert. Every movement of the overseers, every shift in the wind, every rustle of the forest edge carries meaning. Years of endurance have honed his senses. He observes patterns, anticipates behavior, navigates spaces both physical and social. Survival is not merely obedience, it is calculation, intuition, adaptation, and a quiet, unyielding persistence of self. Documents recovered decades later provide a skeletal framework of the ordeal. Fragmented ledgers, bills of sale shipping manifest plantation journals. One entry lists a new hand age, 35 height, 6 feet skill in music. A line in the ledger represents a human life reduced to measurable quantities. The official records continue shipments upriver, arrivals at distant plantations. Disciplinary notes, minimal descriptions of labor output. These fact fragments form a partial chronology, yet they cannot convey the full horror, the intimate terror, or the moments of subtle resistance that constitute daily life. Each omission is telling, each misrecorded name a lost identity, a fractured story. And yet within these gaps, folklore thrives. WPA narratives, oral histories, and whispered tales circulate within the cabins and fields. Ghostly apparitions are said to walk among the cotton at night. Men who disappeared return in dreams, to guide the living, to warn of danger, to whisper paths of escape. Spirituals carry coded instructions, melodies hummed softly recognizable only to those attuned. Even animals, the wind and the rustle of leaves, are interpreted as signs. Each sensory input is layered with significance. Fact dictates the body's labor, folklore guides the mind and spirit. Solomon's consciousness navigates both realms, threading careful observation with inherited wisdom and imaginative interpretation. The plantation itself is a living entity. Trees sway, casting long shadows that shift with the day. Dirt paths, slick with occasional rain, dictate the pace of travel. Rivers, bayous, and marshes are both lifelines and barriers. Solomon observes the subtle differences in water levels, the scent of swamp air, the direction of birds and insects. The natural environment informs strategy. It guides caution. It offers opportunity. Folklore interprets the landscape. A river bend may be safe or treacherous, depending on the whispered stories. A grove of trees may conceal overseers or serve as refuge. Fact and folklore entwine to form a multi-dimensional map of survival. As evening descends, the intensity of the day condenses into a heightened awareness. The overseer's shadows grow longer, footsteps crunch against dry soil. Distant shouts echo across fields. Solomon notes the cadence of patrols, the subtle hesitation of horses, the tone of voices. These details, invisible to the untrained eye, inform action. At night, the wind carries sounds amplified by silence. Ghost stories and spiritual guidance merge with lived experience. A man is said to appear at the river's edge, guiding escapees. A violin plays faintly in the darkness, notes familiar yet untraceable. These occurrences, whether spectral or psychological, provide orientation and courage. The deep bridge emerges as historical evidence and folklore converge. Lost letters, forgotten diaries, fragments of overseers' logs, and partial maps are corroborated by oral testimony. Witnesses recount what was almost invisible: the exact timing of patrols, the placement of tools and wagons, the subtle communication between laborers. Dreams, visions, and omens intersect with reality, offering insight into daily survival strategies. A single detail, a bent branch, a shadow, a whispered song may signal safety or danger. The integration of fact and folklore becomes essential to navigating both space and circumstance. The psychological tension reaches its apex during moments of crisis. A laborer is whipped for a minor infraction. Solomon watches, calculating response and maintaining composure. The whip cracks. The screams pierce the humid air. Fear presses against every chest. Yet in this moment, the lessons of folklore, the patterns of the environment, and the awareness of others converge. A whispered signal, a gesture, a glance, small acts of solidarity become life-saving interventions. Solomon executes a sequence of subtle movements, blending compliance with self-preservation, guided as much by intuition as by stories passed through generations. Rain begins to fall, first a drizzle, then sheets of water washing across the fields. Mud slows every step, turning the familiar terrain into a shifting labyrinth. Trees bend under wind, and storm masking paths, concealing threats. The sound of water falling into ditches and onto leaves mingles with the rhythmic clatter of tools and the distant voices of overseers. Nature itself enforces vigilance. Solomon interprets the signs as both literal and symbolic. Moisture in the air signals the risk of disease, the difficulty of travel, and opportunities for concealment. Each sensory input carries practical and cultural significance. Nightfall transforms the landscape into a liminal realm. Darkness obscures boundaries, amplifies sound, and heightens perception. Within cabins, whispered stories circulate, visions of those who vanished, prophecies of guidance, warnings carried in melody. Songs and chants function as communication networks, moral instruction, and psychological reinforcement. Spirituals sung softly convey direction, caution, and encouragement. Solomon's mind interprets each sound, each movement, each omen, synthesizing them with his accumulated knowledge of the terrain, overseer's behavior, and cultural memory. The folklore provides a lens through which the oppression can be navigated and survival optimized. The climax of his 12-year ordeal coalesces in a series of converging pressures. Physical fatigue, environmental hazards, human cruelty, and spiritual insight combine into moments of acute tension. Solomon witnesses injustice, cruelty, and despair around him. Yet within these moments, he acts with precision, informed by decades of observation. A single choice, a subtle movement, a whispered song may preserve life or signal hope. The intersection of fact, folklore, and personal agency reaches its most dramatic point. Every sound, every shadow, every movement of wind carries amplified significance. Historical and spiritual layers collide. Records of phantom regiments describe soldiers experiencing alarms, without cause, shadows crossing misty fields, and unexplained footsteps. Plantation folklore mirrors these accounts. Apparitions, guiding spirits, protective ancestors. The landscape, rivers, cabins, cane fields, forested edges becomes charged with both material and spiritual signals. Solomon navigates this complex reality, balancing documented risks with intangible guidance, embodying resilience, ingenuity, and courage. Finally, the storm passes, leaving drenched fields, mud-slicked paths, and the quiet aftermath of a day lived under extreme duress. The listener is left with a heightened sense of tension, moral complexity, and the interplay of human action, environmental awareness, and folklore. The deep bridge is fully realized. Fact, human experience, and spiritual memory coalesce to illuminate the apex of Solomon Northup's 12-year struggle. The stage is set for resolution, for the echo of endurance, and for the reckoning with both historical and cultural memory. Every sound, the drip of water, the creak of cabins, the distant call of nocturnal animals reminds the listener that history is lived, breathed, and felt. The interplay of ledger, letter map, story, dream, and song conveys the full richness of Solomon's experience. This is the narrative apex, the cinematic crescendo, where the oppressive system, personal agency, cultural knowledge, and spiritual resonance converge. The deep bridge and climax captures the essence of endurance strategy and the invisible guidance that sustains life, spirit, and hope. The sun rises once more, though the plantation fields are quieter now. The crack of the overseer's whip has faded into memory. though its echoes linger in the soil and the worn paths in the calloused hands of those who endured. Solomon Northup has emerged from bondage, yet the story does not end with freedom alone. It continues in the silent corridors of history and the whispers of descendants in the spirituals, still sung softly in church halls and kitchens. His 12 years lost in slavery are preserved not only in documents, memoirs, and newspaper clippings, but in the cultural memory, the folklore, the songs, and the dreams of a people whose lives were forever altered. Even now, decades later, the plantations stand empty or repurposed. Some cabins remain scarred by time and neglect. The forests have grown back over abandoned paths. Rivers continue their steady flow, carrying with them the faint traces of footsteps that will never be fully recovered. Historians dig through archives, reconstructing fragments, yet gaps remain. Names misrecorded, lives misremembered, moments lost. And in those gaps, folklore fills the void. Tales of spirits walking in the fields of apparitions, appearing to warn or guide of dreams, carrying warnings or hope. These stories persist in the collective consciousness, refusing erasure. Solomon's legacy resonates not only through historical fact, but through the moral and emotional truths embedded in these narratives. His survival ingenuity and resilience become a template for understanding courage under oppression. Yet the stories are not merely celebratory, they are haunting, reminding us of the systemic cruelty that permitted such suffering. They force us to confront uncomfortable truths, to measure the depth of endurance required to survive, to empathize with a humanity often denied the basic recognition of self. The echoes of his experience ripple outward. Families torn apart, communities, disrupted songs, passed quietly between cabins, coded messages carried along rivers, spirituals sung to instill hope. Each element is a testimony, a living monument. Even those who never knew Solomon personally are touched by the persistence of these cultural traces. His story amplifies the voices of countless others lost to history, men and women whose fates were recorded as unknown, yet whose spirits persist in memory and tradition. And yet, there is a haunting question that lingers in every retelling. How many others endured the same journey whose stories were never written, never sung, never remembered? How many vanished into the fields, the forests, the rivers, leaving no trace except the whisper of a name? The memory of a melody, the shadow of a vanished life. These questions are left open, echoing through the centuries, challenging us to listen, to acknowledge, and to remember. The audience is drawn into this contemplation, immersed in a past that is both distant and immediate, personal and universal. Even in contemporary times, the legacy persists. The spirituals sung in churches carry the rhythm of memory. Folklore continues in communities where descendants recount tales of resilience and survival. Scholars unearth documents that illuminate the structural realities of slavery. Yet they are also aware of the human stories that cannot be fully captured in ink. The convergence of fact and folklore shapes understanding, providing depth to a narrative that is at once historical and profoundly human. And as we reflect, the listener is reminded that Solomon's story is not isolated. It is part of a continuum of struggle, resistance, endurance, and spiritual survival. The plantation may have been left behind, yet the consequences ripple through families, communities, and collective memory. Ghosts linger not in fear alone, but as guides, as witnesses, as bearers of truth. The melody of a violin, the rhythm of a drum, the echo of footsteps in a field, all serve as markers of presence and endurance. So we leave the story open-ended, not with closure, but with contemplation. Solomon Northup survived, returned to New York, and recounted his tale. But the echoes of his 12 years in bondage persist. They challenge us to remember to bear witness, to acknowledge both cruelty and resilience. They invite the listener to consider the invisible threads connecting past to present, fact to folklore, history to memory. What would it mean to walk in his shoes, to feel the weight of chains and the burden of hope, to navigate a world simultaneously alive with danger and guided by unseen counsel. And finally, as we bring this chapter to a pause, consider the lingering spiritual and cultural resonance. The songs are still sung, the tales are still whispered, the lessons remain vital. Solomon Northup's life, documented in ledger, in memoir, and in legend, persists as a reminder of endurance, courage, and the unquenchable human spirit. You have just heard one story among countless others, a record from history that refuses to be fully closed. If you feel the weight of this tale, if the whispers and echoes linger in your mind, take a moment to reflect. Leave a comment. Share where you are listening and what moment in this story strikes you most. Your engagement continues the remembrance. It keeps the voices alive. And remember, history is never truly gone when it is felt heard and remembered. You have witnessed the journey of a man torn from freedom, enduring 12 years in the harshest of circumstances. You have walked alongside him, seen the fields, heard the songs, glimpsed the ghosts. And yet the story continues beyond these words, beyond the pages, beyond the recordings. It lives in memory, in music, in whispers. And it challenges us all to confront, to acknowledge, and to never forget. You have just heard a single record from history that has not fully closed. Follow the series, explore more untold stories, and let the echoes of the past inform, haunt, and guide you. For history is alive in those who remember and in those who carry the stories forward.